Let's speak to the Deputy Prime Minister now, Dominic Raab, who joins us on Times Radio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It was only 5 days ago you said that there wouldn't be a vote of confidence. What's changed?
Well, I don't think it will succeed. I don't think it will pass. But we've obviously reached the threshold for having the vote, and those numbers speak for themselves. But ultimately, I think it is an opportunity to put the weeks of speculation behind us, and there'll be a very clear choice for colleagues this afternoon, later on early evening, and that is, do we continue supporting this Prime Minister? Do we draw a line under the sand of the issues around Partygate? The Prime Minister has apologised. He's made the changes in number 10. Do we continue to build on the big decisions he's got right on the vaccine rollout, on getting the economy opened up, his leadership in the war in Ukraine? Do we press forward with our Queen's Speech agenda on everything from raising the level of skills, numeracy and literacy amongst the young people left behind through to the technical qualifications we want to make more broadly available to young people, the crime fighting agenda that I'm working on with Priti Patel? Or do we end up going into not just days, but weeks and months of an internal navel-gazing political process where we're talking to each other as Conservative politicians, not talking to the public at large and focusing on delivering from them? And I think that will be a compelling and I believe and hope a persuasive argument and set of choices for Conservative MPs today.
You and your Cabinet colleagues have been making exactly that case now for several weeks. It doesn't seem to have made any difference with your colleagues now. We know at least 54 of your colleagues want the Prime Minister to go. It could be many more. What do you think happened last week? Something clearly happened last week. We thought the Sugo report had come and people had said they were going to wait for it, and it all went a bit quiet. And then during the course of last week, it seems that some of your colleagues went back to their constituencies, maybe over a cup of tea and a piece of cake during a Jubilee Street party, have had their ears bent by voters, and they've made clear how angry they still are.
It's the kind of thing that is put out there. I don't think that's right. Of course.
You didn't have anybody say to you over the weekend that they were still angry with the Prime Minister about Partygate?
So you'll always get feedback, but the truth is the biggest point of feedback would have been after the local elections. And the reality is it will be compounded different things for different people. But the reality is, in a way, it's academic now.
But did you have people say to you at the weekend they were still angry about Partygate? Did people come up to you?
No, let me tell you, I went to events, Jubilee events in Esher, Walton, Cobham, Oxshott, and I was out and about doing other things. And I've got to say, no one raised with me the specific issue of Partygate.
Nobody mentioned it to you?
No, and by the way, plenty of people raised issues that they weren't happy with. That's bread and butter of being an MP and being accessible to your constituents. But I think the truth is that choice, not just for me, but I think for all of my colleagues, wherever in the country they are, is going to be, do we draw a line in the sand and focus relentlessly with a laser-like precision over the next 2 years, and the next election will be less than 2 years away, on the economy and the cost of living? We've got a £15 billion package. We've got to keep working to deliver that. On the NHS reforms and getting it back, dealing with all of those non-COVID issues post the pandemic, on social care, on crime fighting? Or do we end up with this internal conversation amongst ourselves? And as I said, that will go on for months if we have it. So I think the responsible thing to do, and I think the persuasive choice is to focus on our constituents and back the Prime Minister and back the agenda, which is very full, and we've got to deliver on.
Back in 2018, did you vote that you had confidence in Theresa May?
Well, I resigned as Brexit secretary because of the deal, because I didn't believe that it was right for the country at such a crossroads moment, and I made clear that I wouldn't be able to support on that basis.
So why was it okay to have an internal conversation in a leadership contest then, but it's not okay to have one now?
Well, I think it all depends on the circumstances of the case. And the reality was that Brexit was an irreversible decision, and that deal and the backstop and all of those issues surrounding it would have been irreversible. And I think it was important to to stop and say that was the wrong course. Of course, we've got Brexit delivered. There are still, of course, there'll always be ongoing issues with our European partners, but that's one of the things that we've done. We put that behind us largely, and I think actually with the solidarity over Ukraine, we've shown how closely we can work with our European as well as our US and other allies. But we have this cost of living challenge. We're less than 2 years from the next election. We've got a packed agenda, and I think we've already had the distractions of Partygate, and I understand why that was important to have the transparency, the investigation, the accountability. But I think we've got to get back to focusing on the job, the economy, the cost of living, decent public services, the skills and reform agenda, fighting crime, and of course those other issues around the world, including Ukraine. I think that's what our constituents overwhelmingly expect.
You mentioned accountability. We did have the transparency. We had the full gruesome details, the vomit, the wine up the walls, the brawls and so on inside Number 10. Where is the accountability been? Because lots of people looking at it would say, well, we know what went on. Who has been held accountable? Where is that accountability?
So first of all, you've got the criminal accountability through the fixed penalty notices. Second of all, you've got the changes in personnel at Number 10 and the structure. I think one of the points Sue Gray made, which is fair, is that it had grown in size and been harder to manage as a result of it. It's become, over successive administrations, more like a mid-sized government department. So it will have its own permanent secretary. That will provide an important, significant change in the civil service leadership in terms of personnel. And I think that's right. But it's also right, I think, once the Prime Minister has addressed those issues, apologised, for us to move on. Otherwise, we end up constantly talking about that. And I think it's very frustrating.
But it's not just that we're talking about it. It's because people are very cross about it. One thing that I'm interested in is obviously during the period when the Prime Minister was in hospital, you were the acting Prime Minister. And there wasn't partying going on in Number 10, even though it was the same staff, it was the same size and so on. Why weren't there parties on your watch? Is it because Boris Johnson set the tone that breaking the rules was okay?
No, I don't think that's right. I think overwhelming throughout both sets of periods you're describing, we were dealing with a pandemic, the worst in living memory, with all of the economic as well as the health impacts, and overwhelmingly, notwithstanding all the things that were done wrong, the people in Number 10 were focused in incredibly stressful, high-pressured circumstances and conditions on getting us through. And again, we come back to that point that I mentioned. I think the Prime Minister got the big calls right on the vaccine rollout. That was something that was progressing for months because you had to choose the trials that were backed, the investment that went into it, and then get it industrialized, then get the logistics right. I think that was a massive call, saved a lot of lives, but also helped us come out of the pandemic, open up the economy, save jobs, the 40 million jobs furloughed, or I think it was, and those livelihoods that went with it. So I think the big calls were got right continuously throughout that.
I take that. We've done Ukraine and the vaccine and got the big calls right. But the thing that interests me is that having said all of that and accepted all of that, you're behind in the polls. Boris Johnson was called a liar by Mumsnet. He was booed at St Paul's. He was mocked outside the Buckingham Palace over the weekend. 2/3 of the public think he should resign. Why are you right and the British public are wrong?
Well, I don't think that taking those snapshot barometers in the way you've described are right. People cheered as well as a few heckled.
Can you name another time when any British Prime Minister has been booed at a royal event?
Look, I can think of politicians in public being booed all the time. I can think of Mumsnet giving politicians difficult time. But the reality is, midterm for a fourth-term government, of course, we'd expect to go through a challenging period, particularly after what the country's been through, and whether it's the pandemic, the economic impact of that, and of course, we're going through a great set of challenges over the cost of living. Actually, I think if you look at the how far we are behind in the polls for a midterm government, the surprise is that Labour aren't doing better. But the reality is we stay focused on our...
So you think that the government's doing so badly you'd expect the Labour Party to be doing better?
No, I would think midterm, if we were in as difficult a position as you describe, in the superlatives that you used, actually Labour...
They were just facts. You are behind in the polls. The Prime Minister was booed.
Yeah, but you asked whether... Sorry, to answer your question, before you get quite so overexcited, you asked whether there's ever been a worse situation. Actually, if if you take a look at midterm polling, actually, people would say, why isn't Keir Starmer doing better if he was on course to win at the next election? He's not. He's not convinced the country. And we're the ones, and this is a point I would make, with less than 2 years to go, with a packed agenda on the cost of living, on public services, on skills, on the NHS, on social care, on crime fighting. We're the ones with the plan. I think what people need to see most of all, and that's what the feedback I get from the public, but I think what MPs will focus on today is that choice. Do we focus relentlessly on the job at hand, or do we end up with an internal party political conversation, which I think would be regarded as self-indulgent by many?
Just finally, you ran against Boris Johnson for the leadership in 2019 because you thought you'd do a better job than him. Do you still think that?
No, I think he's got the big calls right, and I think he has my full support, and I believe he'll win today. And I believe that if we can draw a line in the sand by doing so, we'll go on, we'll deliver for the public in the way I described, and we'll win the next election.
Dominic Raab, Deputy Prime Minister, Justice Secretary, thanks so much for joining us on Times Radio.
Good to talk to you.
Your time this lunchtime, Dominic Raab, and thank you for all of your messages.